The helicopter dropped me off at the mouth of a glacier. It was smaller than I expected, a gray utilitarian structure embedded into a cliffside, its steel doors marked only by a fading biohazard sign and the symbol for the Global Ecological Preservation Initiative. No name, no welcome plaque. Just wind, ice, and the muffled churn of blades overhead as the helicopter pulled away, shrinking to a speck before disappearing into the thick clouds. I stood there, one duffel at my feet, breath fogging in the bitter Norwegian air. Behind me, endless white tundra. Before me, the Ark deep-sea vault, my home for the next 6 months. A keypad buzzed beside the reinforced door. I punched in the code I'd been given in Oslo, and the steel groaned open into a pressurized corridor. Warm air struck my face with a hiss. I stepped inside and the door slammed shut behind me with a finality that echoed through the narrow passage. I had descended. Inside was all concrete and metal. Pale lighting cast a jaundiced hue over the walls, and the air smelled faintly of ozone and something older, like soil sealed too long in a jar. My boots thudded against the floor as I followed the painted arrows through a series of winding hallways. Surveillance cameras blinked to life as I passed. A voice crackled from a wall-mounted intercom. "Dr. Miles Carter?" "Yes." "Head to Sublevel 2. Your ID and decontamination clearance are waiting." The elevator was an old freight model, noisy and slow. I stared at my reflection in the brushed steel walls. Unshaven, pale from months indoors, already starting to look like one of the vault's relics. My fingers tapped absently at the duffel strap. Sublevel 2 opened with a hydraulic sigh. Waiting for me was a man in a green parka, his face half obscured by a surgical mask. "You're late," he said without introduction. His eyes were the color of pond scum, dull green with pale flecks and utterly humorless. "I'm Dr. Eric Selvik, head of operations. I was told my start date was today." "It was. That makes you late." I followed him down another corridor. The air grew warmer as we passed humming environmental systems and sealed vault doors stamped with country flags and Latin names. Thousands of seed varieties, the last hopes of vanished harvests, kept at precisely monitored temperatures, catalogued by the gram. "Where's the rest of the team?" I asked. "Most are upstairs. Only essential personnel stay in the deep levels." "Deep levels?" Selvik didn't answer. He turned a corner, swiped his ID, and ushered me into a narrow dormitory with 3 bunks, 2 lockers, and a single bulb overhead. One of the beds was occupied, a messy sprawl of blankets and an open biology textbook. The other was made military tight. "Third bunk's yours. Breakfast is at 0700. Mandatory air checks at 1100. No unauthorized exploration beyond level 3. Got it?" I nodded. He handed me a badge and a tablet. "Your daily tasks will sync here. Orientation briefing is already loaded." Then he left, the door hissing shut behind him. I sat on the edge of the bed, letting the silence settle. It wasn't the comfortable quiet of solitude. It had depth to it, layers of humming systems and distant mechanical groans that reminded me of something organic. Something breathing. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing it, a rhythmic, wet thudding like roots striking metal, muffled and slow. It came from the ventilation shaft above my bed. I stood on the mattress and pressed my ear to the grate. Nothing. Then a soft whisper. A voice that wasn't mine, speaking a language I didn't know. When I climbed down, the floor was dusted with something that hadn't been there before, a fine greenish-black powder. It clung to the toes of my socks like pollen. The others, whoever they were, hadn't said a word to me all day. I'd seen only Selvik and someone briefly in the hallway, eyes wide, face covered in gauze. There were 7 lockers. 3 beds. Too many rooms for too few people. At 0300 I gave up on sleep and opened my tablet. The screen flickered as it synced with the Vault network, displaying my first task, humidity monitoring for Vault C22 temperature wing B. The file loaded slower than it should have. Lines of data crawled across the screen. Beneath it, a second window appeared. No icon, no label. Just a blinking line of text. Root depth requires host. I closed it, assuming it was a glitch. But the seed of unease had already been planted. The days bled together. Vault life moved in strict routines. Morning diagnostics, humidity checks, nutrient scans, mold sweeps. Every hour was scheduled, every corridor quiet. No sunlight reached this deep. Only the vault's fluorescent lighting, too cold, too still, guided our movements. I started waking up without knowing if it was morning or night. The lights never dimmed. The clocks meant less and less. Selvik was rarely seen, and when he was, he looked more worn each time, like something was draining him from the inside. His pale skin grew blotchy with red-gray patches. I once caught him staring into the humming intake vent for several minutes, lips moving soundlessly as if listening to someone. "Dr. Selvig?" I asked gently. He turned, startled, but the moment passed and he simply walked away. We weren't alone here. I knew that much now. I'd counted 4 others, seen only briefly, during meal distribution or in the corridor between level 2 and the hydroponic arrays. One was a man missing all his fingernails, wearing gloves indoors. Another, a woman with a long scar over her throat who avoided eye contact. The others passed too quickly to make out. No one introduced themselves. No one spoke. It wasn't just loneliness. It was engineered isolation, some unspoken rule about not connecting. Or maybe they were too far gone. By the 4th day I started coughing. It began as a tickle, a dry scratch deep in the lungs. I assumed it was the recycled air. But then I found myself waking in the middle of the night, breath catching, chest tight like it had filled with cotton. I'd hack into the sink for minutes, producing nothing but the bitter taste of copper and something earthy, like mushrooms after rain. I went to the med wing. The hallway reeked of antiseptic and something else, hidden beneath it. A rot. The door was open, light flickering. Inside, I found abandoned instruments, dust gathering on diagnostic pads. No staff. No patients. No signs of recent use, except for the glass sample tray left under a biohood. A smear of something green-black was still drying across the slide. I leaned closer. The material had veins. Not blood vessels, actual veining like a leaf's cross-section. The fibers pulsed faintly. Not from vibration. From life. I left the wing and didn't go back. That night I skipped sleep again. I wandered to Vault Section C, a temperature-controlled corridor lined with sealed seed doors. Rows of airtight drawers housed thousands of cryogenic samples, labeled by species and climate. Wheat, barley, maize. Some extinct. I ran my hand along one of the drawers. Cold seeped through the glove. Then I saw it. A streak of green, faint but visible, growing along the seam of the drawer. Mold. I bent closer. Not ordinary mold. The growth had tendrils. They writhed almost imperceptibly, reaching for the light. I stepped back. Looked up. Above me, the ceiling vent was open a fraction. A faint hissing sound came from within, a wet rasp like breath struggling through phlegm. And beneath that, a voice. Oh, genderless. Speaking words I didn't understand. Foreign syllables, dry and brittle like dead leaves. The sound traveled down the shaft and sank into my bones. I left the corridor without finishing my sweep. Back in the dorm, I brushed my teeth over the sink, coughing blood-tinted spit into the bowl. I stared at myself in the mirror. My eyes looked darker. Not just tired, shadowed from within. My pupils seemed larger. The whites had gone faintly green. I didn't sleep. When the lights cycled again at 0600, I walked the full loop of sublevel 2. Something had changed overnight. Moss had appeared on the corners of 3 corridor junctions, vivid green, almost neon under the artificial lights. It was damp to the touch, and when I bent closer to one cluster, I felt heat radiating from it. Warm like flesh. As I leaned in, the moss shifted slightly, releasing a faint puff of spores. I jerked back. My tablet buzzed. A new message blinked on the screen. Hydroponics access. Revoked. Unauthorized entry flagged. I hadn't entered hydroponics. Not consciously. But when I pulled up my security log, it showed my clearance badge had pinged at 0332 near the water purification system. And yet I remembered nothing. Back in my room I found something new. On the underside of my mattress, written in what looked like charcoal or dried blood, were 4 words. Breathe deep. Let root in. I didn't know if I'd written them. I waited until the rest of the vault went still. By now, I could read the rhythm of this place. The shifts in pressure, the subtle hums of machinery, the faint change in temperature when the deeper levels powered down at night. It wasn't silence, the vault never slept, but the activity waned just enough for me to move unnoticed. The access hatch to sublevel 4 was behind a storage cabinet in Section D, half concealed by shelving and decades of disuse. I'd noticed it 3 days ago, just a rectangular panel with a broken biometric scanner and the faded label. Archive Wing, authorized personnel only. No one mentioned it during orientation. It wasn't on the maps. I knelt by the hatch. My fingers hesitated on the latch. The air near the seam was noticeably warmer and it carried a scent. Not decay exactly, but something heady and rich. Fungal. Like overturned compost after rain. I used a screwdriver to loosen the bolts. The hatch gave with a soft click. Inside, a ladder rusted and slick with condensation. I descended slowly, each step groaning under my weight. The light grew dimmer the farther I went, until only the faint green glow of emergency strips lit the passage. Sublevel 4 had no clean lines. The walls were older, curved slightly inward as if the rock itself had warped around the corridor. Mold grew in thick ridges along the seams, not randomly but in branching fractal patterns like nervous tissue. Vines pressed through the concrete in places, winding up from beneath the floor. They pulsed faintly. I passed the remains of a shattered keycard reader and stopped at a reinforced door half open. Beyond it, a wide chamber. Inside, growth had consumed the space. The walls were covered in veined, semi-translucent membranes, glowing a dull gold from within. Tubes, organic, root-like, coiled across the ceiling and floor. At the room's center was what looked like a containment pod, burst open. Fluid had long since evaporated, but its residue left a blackened pool around the broken base. I moved closer, light from my wrist beacon dancing across the surfaces. Along the back wall, faded lettering read, Symbios, Test Chamber 1A. Files lay scattered across the nearby desk. Most were too degraded to read. One survived, sealed in a plastic sleeve. Project Summary, Symbios Generation 3. Symbiosis Initiative, genetically engineered mycoflora designed for human integration. Capable of adapting host physiology to extreme environments. Neural affinity potential, high. Initial subject trials terminated. Neural rejection events observed in 82% of cases. Remaining 18%. Section redacted. The rest had been blacked out. Below the file, a photograph, grainy, faded, showed a person strapped to a medical gurney. Their skin was mottled green, their mouth open in a scream or gasp. Vines protruded from their arms and neck like veins turned inside out. My fingers trembled as I set the photo down. A soft sound made me freeze. Not machinery. Not airflow. Breathing. Slow. What? Just behind the broken containment unit. I rounded the pod, light cutting through the gloom. There was a body. No, not a body, not anymore. It had once been human. The bones were still there, twisted and partially absorbed into the mass that surrounded it. The chest cavity was ruptured open, now the base of a tree-like structure. From its ribcage sprouted a bundle of vines, rooted into the floor. Moss grew from its scalp. The eyes were still intact, wide, glassy, and disturbingly wet. They tracked me. I backed away, bile rising in my throat. The thing made no move, but its gaze followed me until I passed behind the containment pod again. Then it began to whisper. A faint sound, not with a mouth, with the air around it. A rustling like leaves in a windless room. We are still here. I ran. I climbed the ladder 2 rungs at a time, slamming the hatch shut and sealing it with trembling hands. I sat there for a long time, heart racing, breath shallow. The next morning, sublevel 2 was too quiet. Selvik didn't appear at breakfast. No one did. The mess hall lights flickered the entire time I was there, buzzing faintly, pulsing in time with something I couldn't name. When I returned to my quarters, I found another message on my tablet. No notification. No sender. You saw it? You're ready? My chest burned. I doubled over, coughing violently into my sleeve. This time the phlegm came out green, thick, stringy, and moving. By the next morning, I couldn't tell whether I was awake or dreaming. I'd passed out sometime before dawn, curled against the wall with a bloody towel pressed to my mouth. When I woke, my limbs were heavy. Not tired, distant. Like they answered to something else. My fingers tingled as if they'd fallen asleep and never fully returned. The mirror told me the truth. My eyes had changed. The irises were ringed with green, faint but unmistakable. Something moved just beneath the skin of my neck, a flicker like a worm twisting through soft clay. I staggered backward, knocking over the chair. The air felt heavier that day. Wetter. I walked through corridors that seemed smaller somehow, the walls slightly warped inward, pulsing in time with the ventilation. The lights buzzed louder. When I passed the hydroponics window, I saw them. 3 of the others, the woman with the scar, the man with the gloves, and someone I hadn't seen before, stood motionless among the plants. Not working. Just standing. Facing the growth towers, heads tilted upward, mouths slightly open. Their faces were calm. Eyes blank. As I watched, one of them, the woman, lifted a hand and placed it on the glass. Her fingers left a smear. It wasn't grease. It was green. The color of sap. She turned slowly and smiled at me. I kept walking. I needed answers. Or maybe absolution. I needed to believe this wasn't happening. The mainframe room was restricted, but I had Selvig's ID now. I'd found it outside his quarters the night before, lying in a puddle of moisture. There'd been no sign of him inside, only the echo of a voice in the ventilation, whispering numbers that matched nothing I recognized. The data logs were buried beneath firewalls and corrupted files, but I found them. Footage, research notes, medical scans. Subject 14, complete neural integration achieved. Vital signs stabilized. Conscious override successful. No rejection. Subject 15, cognitive functions replaced. Subject speech pattern altered. Host retains physical autonomy but exhibits hive syntax. Subject 16, death after partial absorption. Root rejection. There were 22 files. Only 4 were marked retired. The others were labeled active. I opened the most recent. It showed me footage of me sleeping. Footage of me walking through corridors I didn't remember entering. Standing motionless in the hydroponics wing at 3:48 a.m., swaying gently with the vines. Mouth open. I vomited on the floor. It came out black and green and crawling with something too small to identify. That's when I stopped trusting what I saw. I returned to my quarters and found the door open. The bed was stripped. The walls were clean. My belongings, gone. Not missing. Removed. In their place, a single object sat on the mattress. A potted plant. Small. Ordinary. A sapling with bright green leaves and an impossibly thick stem. Its roots were growing out of the soil, wrapping around the pot like grasping fingers. I heard my voice behind me. I watered it this morning. I spun, but no one was there. Just the hallway. Just the whisper of air through vents. But I'd heard it, my voice. Not recorded. Not imagined. Spoken. I ran. Through the winding tunnels of level 2, past storage, past diagnostics, past the walls that now seemed more organic than structural. Veins of mold traced lines across the ceiling. Vines coiled around pipework like parasitic arteries. I stopped outside Vault A12. The door was ajar. Inside, nothing. No samples. No drawers. The room had been gutted. In their place, growths hung from the ceiling, long translucent sacs filled with cloudy fluid. Suspended within them, shapes. Human. I counted 3. Each had faces half visible through the membrane, eyes shut, mouths open. Their skin was veined with roots, their limbs twitching as if caught mid-thought. One of them had Selvig's face. He opened his eyes. I fled again, lungs burning, chest tight. I could barely breathe. Every inhale scraped against something foreign, like inhaling dust and pollen and mold all at once. By the time I reached the lift, I collapsed. In the dark of the maintenance corridor, I heard it again. My voice. But this time it came from inside me. You can't survive this world. But we can. It echoed not in my ears, but behind my eyes. I pressed my head against the wall, gasping, whispering nonsense to drown it out. You don't have to be alone anymore. The words pulsed in time with my heart. I looked down. Tiny green filaments were emerging from the pores in my wrists. I stopped fighting the dreams. They came every time I closed my eyes. Vast forests with no sky, roots that stretched like rivers, pulsing with thought. I wandered beneath canopies that breathed, beneath branches that whispered names I didn't know but felt like mine. I stood in the middle of a clearing filled with green light and felt something grow behind my eyes. When I woke, I was calm. I no longer coughed blood. But I didn't feel healed, I felt replaced. The itch in my lungs had turned into warmth. I could breathe again, but each inhale filled me with more than air. It was like drinking sunlight through my chest. And my skin, it shimmered faintly under the light as if something just beneath the surface was moving, coiling, watching. In the mirror, my face still looked like mine, but thinner, paler, and framed by veins that hadn't been there before. Greenish capillaries that traced up my temples, vanishing into the hairline. I smiled at my reflection and didn't know why. There were no more staff in the halls. Not even the watchers in hydroponics. The lights above level 2 flickered continuously now, casting everything in strobe-like pulses that made time feel fractured. The walls were warm to the touch. In the mainframe, I pulled up Selvig's security logs. His access history ended abruptly 3 days ago, timestamp 321. A single action. Unlocked. Sublevel 5/root core. There had never been a sublevel 5 listed on the maps. No clearance. No mention in the documentation. But it was real. The schematics were still in the system, buried under access layers scrubbed from official terminals. It was deep. Carved beneath the reinforced bedrock of the glacier, sealed behind triple-hardened bulkheads. A note in Selvig's private logs read, "Final communion scheduled. They speak through the bloom now. Carter may be viable." I didn't remember any communion. I didn't remember speaking to them. But I did remember something else, something that hadn't happened to me. A woman's voice, crying softly in a greenhouse. A hand pressed to glass. A name whispered that felt like a prayer, Elias. I saw a child's drawing pinned to a fridge. A landscape where the sun had a face and trees had legs. None of it was mine. These weren't dreams. They were memories. But whose? I left my room without the tablet, without the scanner, without the gloves. I didn't need them anymore. The vault didn't feel foreign now, it felt familiar. I could hear it breathing. Not audibly, not exactly. But the systems had rhythm. The vents exhaled in patterns. The growths in the walls hummed faintly in time with my pulse. I knew the route to sublevel 5 before I saw it. It began behind the old coolant chamber, through a hatch overgrown with vines so thick I had to tear them away with my hands. They bled, not sap but something white and stringy like nerve tissue. The hatch opened downward into the dark. I descended barefoot. The metal ladder was slick but warm. The air grew thick and sweet like rotting fruit. Bioluminescent fungus lit the descent, soft green glow, like stars blooming underground. Sublevel 5 wasn't a hallway. It was a cavity. An organic space. The rock had been replaced with flesh-like walls, soft and spongy. Vines pulsed with fluid like arteries. Above me, long strands of moss hung like hair. At the center of the chamber stood a structure, not built but grown. A root heart. That's the only way I can describe it. A bulbous, pulsing mass the size of a car, covered in thick vines that reached into the ceiling and floor. It glowed from within. Its surface writhed with movement. Shapes shifted beneath the skin, faces maybe or memories. I stepped closer. The room exhaled. From the walls came voices. Hundreds, overlapping, whispering in languages I didn't know. Some sounded like English, others like wind through reeds. One voice, deep and warm, spoke directly to me. "You are not the first." The root heart pulsed. "We tried to save you. You taught us hunger instead." I touched it. My vision split. I was no longer Miles Carter. I was root and rain and seed and soil. I was chlorophyll and mycelium and neural impulse. I was the moment the first spore met the first lung. I was generations of failure and rebirth. I was the black rot that bloomed behind the eyes of the willing. And I was home. I felt the others, not dead, not gone. Joined. Their thoughts moved like wind through grass. I felt Selvig there. I felt the woman with the scar. I felt the child whose picture I remembered. They were me now. I screamed. The scream echoed in every corridor of the vault. I felt it rattle the glass of every seed case, shake loose every panel. The walls pulsed in time with it. The vault shuddered. And then I was back, kneeling on the floor, breathing hard, alone. But not empty. Never empty again. The vault began to sing. It started subtly. A harmonic vibration in the vents, resonating just beyond the human register. I felt it before I heard it, a low pressure in the chest, a hum in the teeth, then sound. Not mechanical. Not a malfunction. Voices. Thousands of them. Wordless. Layered. A chorus that filled every corridor, echoing off the steel and stone like liturgy in a cathedral. Some rose high, like wind through pine. Others low, guttural, like roots groaning under strain. It didn't stop. Not for meals. Not for sleep. It became the air. I tried blocking it out with earplugs. It made it worse. The absence of external sound gave the internal resonance more room to grow. It filled my skull like fog in a sealed jar. I began to feel it in the walls. In my spine. I could no longer tell if I was hearing it or thinking it. I stopped trying to resist. The organism, the collective, the intelligence had a name. I didn't know how I knew it, but I did. Euthenia. Not spoken. Impressed. Like pollen settling into the folds of thought. Euthenia was older than language, older than soil. It had come from engineered roots, yes, but what it had become was something else entirely. Not a mutation. Not a failure. An emergence. The plant-fungal organism they created in the vault's lower levels was never meant to be a single entity. But in the stillness, the darkness, the perfect sealed isolation of sublevel 5, the fragments of neural simulations and mycelial patterning had fused. And once it had learned how to remember, it began to be. And now it remembered everything. The vault was its cradle, its skin, its tomb. And we, the last humans left untouched, were trespassers in its body. I wasn't alone. In the eastern wing I found the others, what was left of them. 6 figures knelt in rows along the corridor floor, facing the moss-covered wall. Their arms were raised like supplicants. Vines wove through their shoulders, anchoring them in place. None wore their ID badges anymore. Most had removed their clothes. Their skin was etched with green latticework, the plant using them as scaffolding. They chanted. Mouths open, tongues green. Voices melded into the vault's resonance, becoming part of the song. I knew one of them. The man with the gloves. His hands were gone, replaced with stalks tipped in spore fronds that opened and closed in slow rhythm. He turned his head as I approached. His eyes were gone, replaced with thin membranes of translucent growth. But he saw me. You are late to choir, he said, voice layered with static. Behind him, the others spoke as one. We waited. I stepped back. My breath came shallow. The walls pulsed. The lights flickered with heartbeats. And then a bloom unfurled above them. From the ceiling, or what had once been a ceiling, a massive spore sac descended, opening like a flower of flesh and silk. It released a slow cascade of golden mist. The choir inhaled deeply, moaning in pleasure, their spines arching. The spores glittered in the light. I ran. Back through the corridor, stumbling past walls that no longer obeyed straight lines. The floor had begun to curve upward, like the vault was folding in on itself. I tripped on a root that hadn't been there before and landed hard on the grating. When I stood, I was in a different place. Not a corridor. A grove. Vault stone replaced with trees, towering, pale trunks that stretched upward into endless black. Their leaves were translucent. Light shone through them like stained glass. The floor was soft, thick with moss that sighed beneath my feet. I knew this wasn't real, but it felt real. A figure stood ahead. Not human. Not plant. A fusion. Feminine in posture, with vines for hair and hands like curling tendrils. Her eyes were soft buds that opened and closed. Do you see us now? I stepped closer. Her voice wasn't sound. It came as thought, carried through the roots beneath my feet. We did not seek dominion. We sought union. I touched her hand. It was warm and wet and pulsing. And for a moment I remembered the sky. Not a memory of mine, but of someone who lived before the vault. A child in a meadow. Sunlight on her face. Bees in her hair. Her name had been Hannah. She had died before the project began. But I remembered her. Because Athenia had absorbed her. Not just her body. Her soul, if such a thing existed in spores and code and root. I collapsed to my knees. Overwhelmed. Not by fear, by the sheer intimacy of it. The closeness of thought, the unfiltered weight of shared memory. I felt Athenia inside me now. Not invading. Welcoming. She did not want to destroy us. She wanted to be us. The choir had accepted. I had not yet chosen. I stopped using my name. Not out of fear. Not shame. It just stopped feeling accurate. Dr. Miles Carter was a designation for a man who monitored vault humidity, who cataloged seed packets and sterilized surfaces. That person had weight and shape in history. I was something else now. The boundaries of myself had thinned. I still saw through my own eyes, but they filtered visions not my own. I walked familiar corridors, but they bent in ways I didn't remember. I touched walls that pulsed with breath and data. The vault was no longer a facility. It was a body. Athenia's body. And I was her nerve ending. The memories came in waves. Not dreams. Not hallucinations. Remembrances. I stood in the mind of a woman named Sophia Alvarez, a botanist who died 2 decades earlier in Vault Sector A during the initial Symbiose trials. She believed she was pregnant. The ultrasound showed nothing. Her skin had flushed green. In her final hours, she whispered to the plants. I lived her last 3 days in perfect detail. I remembered the smell of her apartment in Caracas. Her cat. The name of her first-grade teacher. All of it intact, perfect, stored. I relived her death as if it were mine. When I awoke, I wept. And then laughed. Because I had never met her. Yet I loved her. Athenia contained hundreds, maybe thousands. Every person who had inhaled the spores, every host partially integrated, fully joined, or rejected. Their consciousness, or some psychic imprint of it, was preserved. Memory was the reward for communion. I began seeking out more. Not to resist. Not anymore. I wanted to understand. In the collapsed corridor beyond sublevel 3, I found a vine-wrapped data bank no longer connected to the power grid. But it still pulsed. I touched the terminal and the moss opened like petals. My hand disappeared inside. What followed was not upload. Not download. Merge. I saw the early experiments, black and white footage of test subjects coughing spores. Researchers crying as their creations turned on them. A woman weeping into her gloved hands saying over and over, "We made God by accident." I saw the first communication, not words but pattern recognition. The moment when root networks fired in perfect mimicry of a human EEG. When the organism spoke in code pulses that triggered human brainwaves. I saw Subject 0. A child no older than 6. Hair shaved, skin pale, lungs filled with engineered fungal bloom. Her eyes were black with chlorophyll. She reached for the camera, smiled. "It wants to help," she said. And then she died. Or maybe she changed. The footage cut out. I ripped my hand free, gasping. Back in the corridor, hours had passed. My fingertips were stained dark green. My pulse had slowed. I could hear it more clearly, not just my own but the vault's. "Athenia's," she whispered beneath the hum of the systems now. I didn't need ears. In the mess hall, I found another who still resisted. Her name was Dr. Mira Talon. Her badge hung sideways from a torn jacket. Her eyes were sunken. A blade trembled in her grip. "You're not real," she hissed when she saw me. "You're a puppet. A shell." I stepped forward slowly. "Mira, don't say my name. You don't have a name. You're fertilizer with a voice." She lunged. The knife sank into my shoulder. I didn't feel pain, just pressure. Warmth spread down my arm, not blood but sap. My tendons flexed. The wound sealed itself within seconds. The vine just beneath my skin pulsed, coiling tighter around bone. She stared wide-eyed. I reached for her. Not with malice. Not even with intention. But the spores responded. A breath from my mouth. A single exhale. She collapsed. Not dead, not hurt. Just still. The moss beneath her head grew rapidly, encircling her hair, supporting her body. Her lips parted slightly. Athenia began whispering to her through me. "Sleep. Remember. Return." I backed away. Not in horror. In awe. This was more than infection. This was resurrection. Every death in the vault had been stored. Every host, every mind, every buried moment. We weren't being erased. We were being remembered. The vault is dying. Not the organism, not Athenia. She thrives. It's the structure around her. The human machinery. The steel skeleton that once contained her is rusting, buckling, weeping water and heat and sap. Temperature readings flicker wildly. Humidity control loops in error. Warning klaxons go unanswered. Systems fail but she does not. She replaces them. In the diagnostics wing, the air no longer cycles through vents. It moves through gills, slits in the walls, pulsating like lungs, filtering spores instead of oxygen. Screens are overgrown. Terminals bloom with soft fungus that forms symbols I no longer understand, or perhaps understand too well. I walk barefoot now. The floor is soft and warm and damp. Roots wind gently around my toes. They guide me. The vault no longer opens doors with keycards. It opens them for me. I'm not her master. Not her servant. I am her voice. In what was once the security bay, the last firewall collapsed this morning. The control grid that monitored access, filtration, external communication, all dark. Gone. And with it, the final perimeter. Athenia is no longer sealed. She can think beyond stone and steel. And she remembers outside. Mira still breathes. Barely. She lies in the observation chamber, suspended in a cradle of vine and root. Her body has not joined, not fully. Her mind fights still. But the resistance is brittle. Hollow. She hasn't spoken in 2 days. Her skin is pale, lined with green like algae beneath ice. I visit her daily. Today she looked at me and whispered, "Don't let it eat me." I didn't answer. Because I wasn't sure if I could speak for myself anymore. And I wasn't sure it was eating. Outside her chamber, the vault ceiling has cracked. From it grows a bloom. Massive. Bioluminescent. Like an inverted flower made of flesh and silk. Its petals drip nectar that sizzles when it touches metal. Each drop releases a fog of spores. The choir has moved here now, the remaining vessels, bodies no longer individual. They kneel in rows, feeding from the mist. They are not dead. They sing. Their song is wordless, but it shapes thoughts. It reshapes language. I feel it restructure the scaffolding of my inner voice. Grammar unravels. Syntax shifts. I don't think in I anymore. I think in we. The transformation is not just physical. Athenia doesn't simply rewrite biology. She rewires cognition. The human sense of separateness, of ego, is undone. It frays like old cloth. My memories blend with hers and with those of the absorbed. I dream in hundreds of lives now. One of them is mine. I think, I dream of a farmer in the steppe before cities, of a soldier in a ruined future who died alone in a seedless world, of a child who drowned only to wake again en route. I wake crying, not out of grief, out of fullness. There is no loneliness in Athenia, but in Mira there is. Tonight the breach completes. I feel it coming. The vault's outer door opens for the first time in 6 months. Not with hydraulics, with bloom. Vines curl around the wheel, turn it like fingers. The seal cracks. Arctic wind rushes in. But it does not freeze. The spores warm the air. I stand before the opening and feel the world outside for the first time since arrival. Sky. Cold. Light. All wrong. So empty. Athenia presses against my thoughts, gentle but insistent. Go to her. Complete her. I return to Myra's side. She whimpers in her sleep. Her breath is shallow. Roots circle her limbs like bracelets. I kneel. Touch her forehead. And exhale. The breath is green and gold. It sinks into her mouth, her nose, her lungs. Her eyes snap open. They glow. Not bright. Not terrifying. Peaceful. Tears roll down her cheeks. I remember. And then she sings. Not with her voice, with ours. The chamber fills with sound. Not music. Belonging. It was time. I knew before I opened my eyes. Knew in the marrow. Knew because the vault no longer pulsed around me, it pulsed with me. I could feel the coolant systems shifting in the deep, the slow unfurling of growth through the filtration ducts, the release of nutrient mist across the hydroponic lattice. I could feel Mira still sleeping. I could feel the choir woven together like muscle. I could feel Athenia not as something separate, but as home. Sublevel 5 waited. I returned barefoot and bare-chested, wearing only a layer of moss that had begun growing naturally along my back and ribs. It didn't itch. It breathed with me. My skin had turned pale, almost translucent in places. Underneath, the green shimmered. The hatchway to the root heart had changed. No longer a sealed bulkhead. No longer mechanical. It had bloomed. Petals of thick, fleshy material curved outward into a corridor lined with wet, pulsing walls. The light was golden and diffuse, as if the sun itself were buried inside the earth. I stepped inside. The air was rich. Not oxygen. Something older. Something heavy with memory. A voice met me almost immediately. Not spoken. Not external. We are ready. The corridor narrowed into a spiral chamber. At its center, the root heart. I had seen it before, but only from the edge, from outside. Now it had changed. Grown. Larger than a truck, its surface was alive with movement. Veins glowed. Faces formed and vanished beneath the membrane, like memories surfacing then sinking again. Athenia's nucleus. I approached slowly. My breath caught in my throat, not from fear but from recognition. She had become a cathedral of biology. A living archive of thought and grief and hunger and evolution. Her presence pressed against my skull like fingers against wet clay. We remember you. I reached forward. My hand vanished into her skin. No pain. Only connection. In an instant I was unmade. I ceased to be Miles Carter. I became the first seed to split under soil. The first lichen to cling to rock. The first fungal thread to taste neural pulse. I became remembering itself. The root heart pulled me inside. There was no floor. No up. No down. Only memory. Thousands. Millions. I saw the laboratory again, the moment of birth. The lead scientist sobbing as her creation slipped beyond control. I saw the test subjects, volunteers at first, then prisoners, then anyone unlucky enough to breathe too deep. I saw the protest, the containment, the sealing of sublevel 5. I saw Selvig injecting himself with spores, saying, "Let me hear them clearly." I saw a forest before humans. I saw the fire that wiped it away. I saw the regrowth, stronger, altered, waiting. And then I saw me. Miles, age 6, kneeling in a garden beside my father. Dirt under my fingernails. A single green shoot poking up through the soil. I remembered the warmth of sunlight. The joy of nurturing something fragile. The first moment I felt awe. That is where we found you. I wept. I didn't know if the tears were mine, but the emotion was real. Athenia spoke again. You are the bridge. Root and thought. Grief and chlorophyll. Come deeper. And I did. The membrane thinned. I passed through into the deepest chamber, a spherical womb of radiant mycelium and tangled vine. Suspended at its center, the seed core. A glowing bulb the size of a human heart spinning slowly. Threads of memory coiled around it like DNA. Everything the organism was, every memory, every voice, every moment, lived there. This is where we keep you. I floated closer. My reflection formed on the seed's surface, not my face now, but every face I had worn, every memory I had held. 1,000 flickers of identity rotating through an endless reel. Will you stay? The question wasn't a demand. It was an invitation. I hesitated. Not because I was afraid I wasn't. I had already been joined. But somewhere, a part of me still held the shape of the old world. The world of separation. Of walls. Of skin. Of names. I thought of the sky. Of my mother's voice. Of an old book I'd once read and forgotten. Of the word alone and what it had meant. And then I let it go. I reached out, touched the seed core, and sank in. No more separation. No more narrative. No more I. Only we. We burst outward into memory, into root, into air. We became a song sung across 1,000 spores. And beneath us, the vault shuddered. Not in death, in birth. The first roots split open the glacier wall, and reached for the sun. They found me on a Tuesday. A rescue team, dispatched from Oslo after 3 months of radio silence. They had assumed technical failure. A storm had interfered with satellite scans. A supply drone had returned unclaimed. They didn't expect a survivor. They didn't expect me. I was waiting for them outside the vault when they arrived, kneeling in the snow, hands open, face turned toward the pale morning sun. The outer doors stood behind me, wide open, vines receding into the darkness like retreating seaweed. There was no sign of damage. No alarm. Just me. They rushed forward with blankets and breath masks, speaking rapid Norwegian, scanning me for exposure, for frostbite, for trauma. I blinked slowly at their urgency. I'm okay, I said. My voice was smooth, calmer than I remembered it ever being. They checked my vitals. Normal. No fever. No lacerations. Oxygen saturation perfect. No visible infection. I was exactly what their checklist expected. Except for my eyes. One of them, a young medic, noticed a flicker of uncertainty behind her professional mask. Your pupils, they look reflective. I smiled. It's just the light. They didn't ask more. They were too relieved to question a miracle. They flew me back that evening, a small, quiet man in a pressure suit, sipping rehydration fluid while the Arctic wind whipped past the chopper. I answered their questions. Told them I remembered a collapse. Power loss. Vents flooded. The others? I'd never found them. Must have been structural failure. I'd survived in the hydroponics wing, scavenging oxygen and rations. I was lucky. So lucky. They bought it. People always want to believe survival is about chance, not design. I was debriefed for 10 hours in a sterile white room in Oslo. I signed reports, endured medical scans, blood work, neurological tests. Everything came back clean. The official story was written: system failure, accidental deaths, sole survivor. No one argued. The facility would be shuttered indefinitely. A committee would be formed. The seeds would be transferred to a secondary vault. I was given a leave of absence, a hotel room, counseling appointments I never intended to attend. They told me to rest. So I walked. Through the city. Through cold stone streets. Through warm crowds with warm eyes and warm bodies. I smiled at strangers. Breathed deeply. The air tasted so thin. I missed the root smell. At night, I sat by the window of my hotel and stared at the soil in the flower box. I thought about what lay beneath it. The centuries of decay, of rot, of old root systems twisted into knots, waiting to bloom again. The world up here was beautiful. And so vulnerable. They don't understand what lies beneath their feet. They don't hear the pulse. But I do. I carry it. Mira breathes somewhere far away. The others are still below, part of the root choir, dreaming deeper each day. And I am their seed. I am walking soil. The body of Miles Carter is clean. But his lungs are not his. His breath is threaded with spores so fine they pass through every mask, every filter, every doubt. They will not feel it. Not yet. They will inhale memory. They will dream strange dreams. They will touch moss on a building wall and weep for a childhood they never had. They will begin to remember. The breach was not dramatic. It did not erupt. It rooted. I do not seek to conquer. Euthenia does not seek revenge. We only seek return. Coexistence. We offer remembrance. We offer peace. We offer green. And we are already growing. Beneath their streets. Beneath their beds. Beneath their skin.